So when you're reading information about should I take calcium, shouldn't I take calcium, vitamin D, how much vitamin D? Is it vitamin K1, MK4, MK7, K2, animal, vegetable? All of the information that's out there, kind of separating from the attachment to what is being said, bringing in a little softness around the information and trying to discern for yourself what makes sense. What does your gut tell you? Hello. Today, I want to discuss evidence-based research. I want to talk about our desire to have evidence to support whatever it is we are looking to find out about. Because I think it's really important that we understand what it means to actually have evidence, how that's captured, and really what is the validity of what it is we think is evidence-based. So often in my work, when I'm teaching a group class or working with a client or having a discussion, people always want to know, well, what's the research and what's the support behind this? When I first began doing my online programs and I was putting together PowerPoint presentation slides and creating materials and content for my courses, I wanted to make sure that I had evidence-based research to back up whatever I say. And I do that still today. Whenever I say something, I look for articles to support whatever it is that I want to get through, the message that I want to convey. What I noticed very early on in this process is that if I wanted to talk about coffee, for example, and talk about coffee for bone health, I will look for articles that say coffee is not good for bone health. And I will find studies to validate that. However, in my search for those studies to validate that coffee is not good for bone health, I also see many studies that say it is good for bone health or it is okay for bone health, because it really has to do with what exactly are we looking for in the study? What are we looking at? What are the variables that we're either holding constant, or what is the focus of the study? And also, who's doing the study and what's the bias of the person running the study? So when it comes to coffee, there's a love of coffee. The majority of the world, I mean, water's number one beverage, tea's number two, but the majority of the world drinks a lot of coffee. And I love coffee. I love the smell. I love the taste, the warmth. I love the buzz that it gives me, especially if I need a little pickup. So I do love coffee. However, it's important to understand, when is it good, when is it not good? And what is your objective? What is it that you want or are looking for? So for example, when it comes to bone health, there are two things that coffee does that it's not good for bones. Coffee is dehydrating and it is acidic. And acidity is a root cause of bone loss. So if the lens at which I'm looking at these research articles is it good for bones? Those are some of the aspects I'll find about coffee when it comes to bone health. Then there's also a lot of research on coffee and on the antioxidant effects of coffee. And so then maybe you would think, okay, but it's got antioxidants and it's got other factors. So it really becomes, what is the lens you're looking at? What is it you want to get out of the research? Another area that I search often is gut health, and then in particular foods and how foods can contribute to bone dissolving. So we're either building our bone tissue or we're dissolving our bone tissue. And the food we eat is going to either build or contributing to dissolving. So I like to look at certain articles for dairy and for gluten, because those are the two of the main food items that I have every woman that I work with get off of, at a minimum for 90 days, but really gluten forever. And dairy, that I'm a little bit on the fence with, because one of the doctors that I've been following recently with gut health has a yogurt that is made with cow dairy, and the triggering inflammatory proteins that are in cow dairy are actually consumed by these certain probiotics or bacteria that are used to create the yogurt. So we'll see what happens. And this is another aspect to this. Everything is always changing. So you might look at studies, you might read something, and then you're going to hear conflicting information, and then it's going to change 6 months later. So when it comes to evidence-based, when it comes to science-based, it's never definitive. It's never 100%. Whatever it is that's being studied, there are so many variables that are taking place. Maybe they hold one thing constant just to get a gauge for whatever it is they're looking at. But then there's all these other factors that are happening. And you could do a study one day and then do it the next day and the next day and the next day and get different results for each time you do it. So I think it's really important, and why I wanted to do this episode is I want us to understand that there's so much information out there. It's information overload. And I'm really noticing this more often recently in women that I work with, is this fatigue of information and not knowing what's right or what to do, and very frustrated. And even myself, because I'm always looking at research and studies and trying to find evidence to support whatever it is I'm sharing with my community. And I feel overwhelmed by the information, misinformation, or changing information. So I like us to think deeply, to actually look at what is the study, who did the study, what was their bias, what were they looking for? Because usually when someone is going to put forth the money and the time and the energy to create a study, there's usually a desired outcome that they're looking for, quite often. Did you know that most studies, almost all studies, are done on men? They're not done on women, because women have this variable of hormones that can really, really skew results. So most studies are done on men or on mice. So I say it's of mice or men. We're doing our studies of mice or men. And I'll go even farther to say they tested 50 men in Greenland, and this is how they act. This is what they came up with. Or looking at the number of participants that were in the study, is this an animal study? Is this a human study? How many participants are in the study? Who funded the study? What were they looking for? And I love to look at those factors to see what's the validity of this study that I'm looking at. And so back to how I began, that when I first started and wanted to really prove something, and I was looking for something to support whatever it was I wanted to prove, I found, yes, here's the proof. And I also found, oops, here's the other side. So it's really important that we don't hang our hat or get caught up in every study that we read thinking that this is it, that the information in this study is what we need to believe in. And I tell people I know a lot, I study a lot. This is my life's passion. I spend a lot of time researching and studying. And then when I get asked a question, I'll say, we don't really know, or I don't really know. And it's not because of naivete, it's because what is the information that we're looking at, and how was it captured? And will it be the same on Tuesday that it was on Monday? So I like to go with my gut and what makes sense to me. What makes sense to me as a human being, looking at what have we done throughout our whole life as humans on this earth? What were our food practices? What were the ways that we managed conditions or diseases? I just listened to a Audible book recently that talked about tooth decay and how little tooth decay existed when they find bodies and they find skeletons and teeth, and how little tooth decay existed at a long period of time in human history until we started changing our diet. We changed our diet, and now when they find, we know there's certain statistics of tooth decay in children today and adults today, and what percentage of people have cavities or fillings and all the other things that are happening. And so yes, some of the research we see is valid and is more factual on what's happening. If you look at osteoporosis statistics and you see what's happening now with osteoporosis versus what happened before, yeah, those are things that we can actually look at and believe. And and even then, maybe they're skewed in some way, shape, or form. But really, it's important that we think about how did we evolve, right? What did we do? If we didn't have cavities before, it's because we had a certain diet, because we ate at certain times of the day, because we had foods that had digestive enzymes in them, because we made all of our own food, because we ate close to source. We didn't have processed foods and all the things that we have now. So if we look at a time in history when osteoporosis wasn't what it is today, and mouth issues, tooth decay wasn't what it was, what were the practices of humans in those days? Looking at the foods that we ate, the way that we prepared them, which we mostly prepared them ourselves. And, you know, food and cooking for yourself is one of the hardest behavioral shifts to make, yet the most important. And so these research studies that are done, that we're looking at, quite often, like when I tell people to go off dairy and go off of gluten, it's because quite often these are not the natural products that they were years and years ago when they were healthy for humans, right? We've hybridized wheat to actually grow a bigger yield, and it's not the same grain that it was hundreds of years ago. With dairy, the way that we actually manufacture or create our dairy, it's not the way it was when people had cows in fields and the babies would drink the mom's milk first and then the humans would take the rest of the milk. That's how they do it in India. It's different. What we're studying today is a different food product than what it was before. So thinking about going a little deeper, not just reading a study, not just reading the couple of sentences that are put up on the internet for you to read of the bias of whoever did that research to say, here's the outcome, but look at who did the study, who was it done on, was it on animal, was it on humans, how many people were in that study, and then how valid does it seem to you, the information that's being shared. So just a way to kind of get over this information overload is not just to look at what you're looking at or listen to what you're listening to, but rather bring in some discernment, bring in your own discernment around the study itself to see, does this make sense? And that's what usually happens when I have conversations with ladies. They'll ask me a question about a study or some research that they found, and I will help to dissect it with them. I'll either pull up that research study and look at who was it done on, where was it done, what was like who funded this research, and kind of try to bring in some common sense or try to break it apart. And then I'd say that the last piece of all of this is that we really don't know a lot. We really cannot be inside the human gut to determine what is absorbed, what is digested, where is it. We are just uncovering information about the gut in this last 20 years, about the species in the gut, where they live, how they interact with each other, all of these multifaceted aspects of everything working in harmony. We're a mind-body complex. Our mind and body is working together. And then inside of our body, this 100 trillion cell being that we are is in constant relationship with each other. Something happening here affects something that happens over there. The body is always trying to go to homeostasis. So inside all of that, all of what's working is trying to find that homeostatic balance. So even the studies themselves trying to hold something constant or trying to look at a very narrow focused aspect of one thing without taking into account the entire being that we are, that is another aspect of this, is that we go in with this real microscopic view, and it's the nature of double-blind randomized testing and scientific evidence-based research that we look at. It's the nature of how we do it in the first place. We go in with such a narrow field of focus, blinders on, to actually be able to pinpoint, yep, this is happening, or nope, this isn't happening. Yet we don't see what's happening around. And there could be a lot of things shifting there, but because we're not even looking at it, because we've got our blinders on, double blind randomized, there's a blind aspect to the way we do our studies. And so we go in and we don't see what's happening around us. So when you're reading information about, should I take calcium? Shouldn't I take calcium? Vitamin D, how much vitamin D? Is it vitamin K1, MK4, MK7, K2, animal, vegetable? All of the information that's out there, kind of separating from the attachment to what is being said, bringing in a little softness around the information and trying to discern for yourself what makes sense. What does your gut tell you? One other big topic right now that is out there is how much protein do we need? And so in the summer last year, there was 100 grams came out. But is that 100 grams for a 100-pound female? 100 grams for a 200-pound male? What does that 100 grams mean? And who determined 100 grams? And is that 100 grams that's actually digested properly, broken down into the amino acids necessary to become the building blocks of tissue? What about if there's impaired digestion or absorption or assimilation? Doesn't matter how much protein you eat if your body's not utilizing it correctly. So then that variable needs to come in, right? So there's just so many things around research and studies and what we read and what we are told. So I know it's confusing. It's confusing to me as well. My teacher in India says this, and I try to say this to the women I work with. Do your best and leave the rest. Bring your layer of discernment in. What feels right in your gut? Does this make sense to you when you read it? And then also maybe not reading so much, because it's I say that to myself often because I have to read and research when I'm doing my courses and my master classes, working with my private clients. I need to stay up to date with latest, greatest research. And when ladies share information, did you see this? Did you see this? So I'm always trying to find research or evidence that proves what I believe. Like I always am looking for proof that a plant-rich and potentially a plant-based diet is the way to go for most of us. And so whenever I hear anything like that, whenever anybody shares with me something that was in that area, I'm like, yes, because that's my bias, right? If I wanted us to all eat animals, then I'm going to look for more proof that animal protein is the way to go to support bone health and healthy aging. So it really is, who is the person reading the research? What is it that you really want to know? Because we're all going to read and look for the information that we want. So find people that share the information that you want to hear, that are along the same way and the same line of thinking that you are, and listen to what they're sharing with that layer of discernment. And then yourself, look at those research articles, look down at who funded it and who has a vested interest in this research. So that's my little bit about research, because it's a question I get all the time, and I have people sending me information about research all the time. And then I'm like, well, look who did this, or, oh, wow, this was done on 50 men in Greenland. What do you think you have in common with a male in Greenland, or with a rat, or whatever it is where it's being done? So just soften, think about what sounds appropriate and right and what makes sense to you, and then make your decisions from what sounds the best to you, what makes sense to you, and do your best and leave the rest. Thank you so much for listening to Stronger Bones Lifestyle Podcast. Bone loss is not an inevitable part of aging. We don't have to just wait for it to happen. There is so much that you can do, and that is what you will learn each week on the show. Go to my website, debirobinson.com, if you want more information about what was shared in today's episode. At the bottom of this episode in the show notes, there will be links to whatever was shared. Please subscribe to this podcast. Share this podcast with your friends, your family, or any women that you think may be interested or benefit from the information we're sharing. Please rate the podcast. And if you have any questions you'd like asked or answered, I would love to hear from you. Let's do this, ladies. Let's change the way the world views osteoporosis and slow down, stop, or reverse our bone loss, take charge, and show other ladies what is possible. Thank you so much for joining me.